it doesn't happen all at once. It begins quietly, in moments so small you barely notice. You open the fridge and stand there, forgetting why. You reach for a word that once came easily, and it lingers just beyond your grasp. You laugh it off, tell yourself it's just age, it's normal. But deep down, something feels different. Something feels stolen. Nearly 55 million people worldwide are living with dementia, and every 3 seconds someone new is diagnosed. But what if the real danger isn't just time passing? What if part of the problem is something you trust every day? Something sitting quietly in your medicine cabinet? Today, we're uncovering the hidden truth. Medications you've been prescribed, the ones meant to help, could be quietly harming the very thing you rely on most. Your memory, your mind, your independence. But there is hope, because just as damage can be silent, so can healing. Sometimes it doesn't take a prescription. Sometimes it just takes a few simple foods, and mornings start to feel different again. Forget the pharmacy. The real healing starts with what's on your fork. The silent risk of antihistamines and benzodiazepines. It started with something so small that Tom didn't even think twice. A little congestion in the springtime. A few restless nights that stretched too long. At 77, he had seen these things before, and he had learned not to make a fuss. So he picked up an over-the-counter allergy pill, the same brand he had trusted for years. And when the sleepless nights became a steady companion, his doctor suggested a low dose of an anti-anxiety medication. Just to help you relax, they said. It's nothing serious. Tom believed them. After all, wasn't that what modern medicine was for? To make the little discomforts of life easier to bear? At first, it seemed to work. The sneezing eased, he slept more soundly, or so he thought. The nights felt shorter, the days a little lighter. But slowly, almost invisibly, something else began to change. Tom would forget why he walked into a room. He would misplace simple things, his glasses, his keys, and find them hours later in places he swore he hadn't been. One morning, standing at the edge of his driveway, Tom stared at 2 mailboxes. Identical, ordinary, and realized he couldn't remember which one was his. The panic rose inside him like a tide. It passed quickly, but the fear it left behind stayed. What Tom, like so many others, didn't realize is that first-generation antihistamines, such as diphenhydramine, and benzodiazepines like Xanax and Valium, share a dangerous trait. They block acetylcholine, a vital chemical messenger in the brain. Acetylcholine is the bridge between memory, learning, and attention. Without enough of it, the mind loses its way, first in small ways, then in larger ones. And the danger isn't just theoretical. Studies have shown that seniors who regularly take these medications face a 50% or greater increase in the risk of developing dementia. Not because they were careless, not because they let themselves go, but because something they trusted was quietly pulling the wires inside their brain. One forgotten word, one missed memory, one uncertain step at a time. The early signs are easy to dismiss, losing track of the day's appointments. Forgetting a name you know you should know. Feeling a little foggy after a full night's sleep. But when these moments become habits, when forgetfulness becomes a quiet shadow following you from room to room, it's not just normal aging. It's a silent warning. Tom thought he was helping his body find rest. He never suspected he was slowly muting the parts of his mind that made him. That morning, as he stood beneath the rising sun, frowning at 2 mailboxes that should have been as familiar as his own reflection, he didn't just lose his way home. He lost a piece of certainty, a piece of himself. And no one had warned him that the real danger wasn't what he could feel. It was what he couldn't. Proton pump inhibitors, stomach relief at a terrible cost. For Margaret, it was supposed to be a small fix. A little purple pill each morning to calm the burning in her chest. She had struggled with acid reflux for years, and her doctor assured her that a proton pump inhibitor, something like Prilosec or Nexium, could make meals comfortable again. And it did. For a while, Margaret felt better. She could enjoy her coffee again, her favorite tomato soup, without wincing in pain. But then, new things started happening. Things that had nothing to do with her stomach. Margaret would forget where she placed her reading glasses, not once but twice, sometimes 3 times in the same morning. She would stare into the pantry, unable to remember what she was looking for. At first, she brushed it off, laughing about, getting older. But deep inside, something didn't feel like a joke. What Margaret didn't know was that proton pump inhibitors don't just neutralize acid. They also block the absorption of essential nutrients, particularly vitamin B12 and magnesium. Without enough B12, the brain struggles to make the neurotransmitters that keep memory, focus, and coordination sharp. Research now shows that seniors who use PPIs long-term face a 44% higher risk of dementia. Not overnight, but quietly, memory by memory, day by day. One afternoon, Margaret tried to set the table for a small family dinner. Forks in one hand, napkins in the other. And suddenly, she forgot how many plates she needed. The confusion hit her harder than any heartburn ever had. And standing there, lost between the kitchen counter and the dining table, Margaret realized the cost of comfort had been far greater than she ever imagined. If you've ever woken up and felt like your legs didn't quite belong to you anymore, tap 1 in the comments. If your heart ever raced wildly and you stayed quiet, thinking it was just stress, tap 2. And if you've ever sighed to yourself, whispering, maybe it's just old age, tap 3. I read every comment, because sometimes the story that needs to be told next is yours. Margaret's heartburn eased, but something far more precious, her certainty, her clarity, was slipping quiet. Antipsychotics, the cruel irony. George had always been the steady one, the rock of his family. He remembered every anniversary, every birthday, every story behind every scar. Even as the years slowed his hands and stiffened his knees, his mind stayed sharp, his greatest point of quiet pride. So when the doctors suggested a small dose of antipsychotic medication to help with agitation he occasionally showed in the evenings, George didn't hesitate. They said it would calm the nerves, help him feel more at ease. It sounded reasonable. And at 82, George trusted the white coats more than he trusted his own restlessness. At first, it seemed to help. The pacing around the living room slowed. The anxious tapping of his fingers faded. His family sighed in relief, thinking he was finally resting. But no one noticed what was beginning to fade with the anxiety. George stopped reaching for the newspaper in the mornings. He stopped jumping into the crossword puzzle over breakfast. He stopped asking his son how the fishing trip went. The spark, the curiosity, the vibrant mind that had anchored his whole life was dimming. One morning, sitting alone at the kitchen table, George flipped open a photo album. Inside were the faces of people he had loved, laughed with, lived for. And yet, staring into the smiling face of his oldest friend, he felt nothing but a vague confusion. He knew he should know him. But the connection, the thread of memory, had unraveled. The cruel irony is this: antipsychotics like Risperdal, Zyprexa, and Seroquel are designed to stabilize chemical imbalances in the brain. They alter levels of dopamine and serotonin, two vital messengers that not only regulate mood, but also underpin motivation, memory, and emotional connection. While these medications can calm visible symptoms of agitation, they often do so by muting the brain's ability to engage fully with the world. The result isn't peace. It's a kind of emotional and cognitive sedation, a soft, relentless quieting of the mind's natural fire. Even more alarming, the FDA has issued black box warnings about the use of antipsychotics in seniors, especially those with dementia. Studies show they are associated with a higher risk of accelerated cognitive decline and even death. But the changes don't crash down overnight. They slip in softly, stealing moments, stealing selfhood under the disguise of calmness. George wasn't calmer because he had found peace. He was calmer because the world around him, the laughter, the memories, the sharp edges of life, had faded into a fog he could no longer part. He wasn't just losing his anger, he was losing the parts of himself that knew how to care, to remember, to love. And no one told him that sometimes the medicine meant to help you hold on can be the very thing that makes you let go. Sleep aids, dreams lost before morning. Diane used to love mornings. She loved the way the sunlight spilled across her kitchen counter, how the steam curled up from her first cup of coffee, how the day stretched ahead with a quiet kind of promise. But sleep had started to slip away from her. Nights grew longer, lonelier. The clock glowed 2 a.m., 3:30 a.m., 5 a.m. When her doctor prescribed a small sleeping pill, something gentle, something common like Ambien, Diane felt relief. Finally, she thought, finally she would drift off like she used to. And she did. But the mornings changed. She would wake up feeling heavier, slower, her legs felt uncertain beneath her. The kitchen counter she loved became something she had to hold on to. What Diane didn't know was that Z-drugs, the class of medications including Ambien, Sonata, and Lunesta, don't mimic natural sleep. They sedate. They flatten the deep and REM sleep stages, the ones where the brain repairs itself, sorts memories, and restores emotional resilience. You might sleep through the night, but your brain wakes up tired, disoriented, starved of the restoration it desperately needs. Research now links these drugs to increased risks of brain fog, confusion, falls, and even dementia in seniors. And it's not just about memory, it's about balance, clarity, the simple ability to trust your own body when you stand up in the morning. One dawn, Diane rose from her bed, stepped toward the kitchen, and stumbled into the counter she used to greet like an old friend. She caught herself, barely, and standing there, hand pressed against cool granite, heart pounding, she whispered aloud without meaning to, "What's happening to me?" It wasn't just a bad night. It wasn't just age. It was her mind, struggling under the weight of a solution that quietly stole what it promised to protect. Tricyclic antidepressants and bladder medications, two hidden dangers. Eleanor had always been proud of her mind. Crossword puzzles on Sunday morning, lively debates at the book club, remembering every grandchild's birthday without needing a calendar. But over the past year, something had shifted. It started small, skipping a clue she normally would have known, losing the thread of a conversation halfway through. Standing in the kitchen, recipe in hand but forgetting where she left the mixing spoon. Eleanor blamed it on the sadness she had been carrying after her husband passed. Her doctor agreed, prescribing a tricyclic antidepressant to help lift the heaviness. Later, when bladder urgency became another quiet burden, she added a second medication. Something simple to help with control. What no one told her was that both prescriptions shared something dangerous. They were strong anticholinergics. They didn't just target the sadness or the urgency. They blocked acetylcholine, the critical chemical her brain relied on to think clearly, remember fully, and move confidently. Little by little, her mind began to blur. One study after another now confirms that seniors who take anticholinergic medications face a sharply increased risk of memory loss, confusion, and brain shrinkage. Not from disease, not from age, but from a slow chemical starvation inside their own bodies. One evening, at her granddaughter's birthday party, Eleanor sat smiling, cake in hand. But when the child rushed into her arms, she hesitated, just for a moment, searching for her name. A name she had whispered 1,000 times before. It was a moment no one else noticed, but Eleanor felt it. A small, sharp tear inside her heart. She wasn't forgetting because she was careless. She was forgetting because the very pills meant to help her had quietly dulled the sharp edges of who she was. And somewhere deep inside, she realized, it wasn't just her body they had tried to calm, it was her spirit too. Statins and anticholinergic combinations, the silent stack. Paul had always been a fighter. When his doctor told him years ago that his cholesterol was high, he didn't hesitate. He changed his diet, took his prescribed statins faithfully, showed up to every checkup on time. He was proud of how he fought for his heart. He thought he was winning. But then, strange things began to happen. Paul, who once navigated his small town without a map, found himself pulling over during familiar drives, uncertain of where he was. He fumbled over simple directions. He forgot the names of side streets he'd driven down for decades. At first, he shrugged it off. Maybe it was just normal aging. Maybe everyone lost a step eventually. What Paul didn't know was that statins, while life-saving for many, can also lower cholesterol levels in the brain. And the brain, contrary to what most believe, needs cholesterol desperately. It forms the structure of every neuron, fuels the communication between thoughts, memories, and movements. When statins strip too much cholesterol, the mind doesn't collapse overnight. It slowly weakens, like a bridge missing a few bolts at a time. Memory fog, difficulty concentrating, emotional flatness, these aren't inevitable. Sometimes they're warnings. And when you combine statins with other hidden anticholinergic drugs, cough syrups, cold medicines, even muscle relaxers, the effects silently stack. Each small pill, harmless on its own, building into something the brain cannot fight forever. One afternoon, Paul stood at the town square, his dog leash in hand. He looked around at the shops, the streets, the passing faces, and realized he didn't know which way to go. Not for home, not even for the car. His dog tugged gently as if reminding him. And Paul, steady fighter that he was, felt something deep and unfamiliar. Fear. Not fear of getting lost, but fear of losing pieces of himself, without even realizing it was happening. 3 simple foods that can change everything. Not every battle is fought with medicine. Sometimes the smallest shifts, the ones that happen quietly in your kitchen, can rewrite the future your body thought was inevitable. Margaret, Tom, Diane, Eleanor, Paul, none of them needed more prescriptions. What they needed was a way to feed their minds, not just their bodies. And sometimes, the answer isn't locked inside a pharmacy. It's waiting in the simplest places. First, blueberries. Tiny, unassuming, easy to overlook, but inside, a powerhouse of protection. Rich in anthocyanins, blueberries fight the silent rust that builds in brain cells over time. Studies show they can improve memory and delay brain aging by years. Nancy, 73, added a handful to her breakfast each morning, and soon found herself recalling stories she thought had slipped away forever. Second, fatty fish. Salmon, sardines, mackerel, rich in omega-3s that build the very walls of brain cells, keeping them strong, flexible, and sharp. For James, 76, adding fish twice a week wasn't just about eating healthier, it was about feeling himself again, remembering the words to his favorite songs without needing to hum the first line. Third, leafy greens. Spinach, kale, collards, dense with vitamin K, folate, lutein, a symphony of nutrients that sharpen focus and slow cognitive decline. Helen, 80, who once needed a grocery list for just 3 items, now smiled when she zipped through her market trip, basket in hand, memory intact. No prescriptions needed, just a few simple foods and a different morning ahead. Because sometimes the real rescue isn't loud or complicated. It's in the small, faithful choices that slowly stitch your mind back together. One meal, one memory, one quiet victory at a time. When the mind finds its way home again. Healing didn't come for Tom in a pill bottle. It came quietly, in a handful of blueberries dropped into his morning oatmeal. It came in the grilled salmon he shared with his grandson on Sunday afternoons. It came in the fresh spinach leaves he tossed into a simple salad, without thinking, without overcomplicating. For Margaret, it wasn't a grand breakthrough. It was standing in her kitchen one morning, realizing she didn't need to double-check the recipe for her favorite pie. It was tying on her apron, humming an old song she hadn't thought of in years, the words slipping back into her mouth like an old friend. Eleanor laughed when she finished her first full crossword puzzle again. Paul smiled when he found his way home from the market without glancing once at a map. Nancy didn't need a sticky note on the fridge to remember her sister's birthday. The pieces weren't just coming back, they were being rebuilt, meal by meal, day by day, with choices made not out of fear, but out of quiet, steady care. Because dementia doesn't have to steal everything, and getting older doesn't have to mean getting smaller, fainter, or lost. Sometimes it just means learning how to listen differently, to your body, to your mind, to the simple wisdom that food can carry. Forget the pharmacy. The real healing starts with what's on your fork. And when you choose it, morning after morning, you're not just feeding your body, you're giving your mind a place to find its way home again. If this felt true to you, I think you'll really appreciate the next video too. Take a look. And if you believe there's still more life waiting to be lived, you can save this video, just in case you need it someday.